Mount Hood. Mount Hood is a potentially active stratovolcano in the Cascade Volcanic Arc. It was formed by a subduction zone on the Pacific coast and rests in the Pacific Northwest region of the United States. It is located about 80 kilometers east-southeast of Portland, on the border between Clackamas and Hood River counties. In addition to being Oregon's highest mountain, it is one of the loftiest mountains in the nation based on its prominence, and it offers the only year-round lift-served skiing in North America. The height assigned to Mount Hood's snow-covered peak has varied over its history. Modern sources point to three different heights: 3,429 meters, a 1991 adjustment of a 1986 measurement by the U.S. National Geodetic Survey, NGS, 3,426 meters based on a 1993 scientific expedition, and 3,425.6 meters of slightly older origin. The peak is home to 12 named glaciers and snowfields. It is the highest point in Oregon and the fourth highest in the Cascade Range. Mount Hood is considered the Oregon volcano most likely to erupt, though based on its history, an explosive eruption is unlikely. Still, the odds of an eruption in the next 30 years are estimated at between 3 and 7%, so the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, characterizes it as potentially active, but the mountain is informally considered dormant. Establishments. Timberline Lodge is a National Historic Landmark located on the southern flank of Mount Hood just below Palmer Glacier, with an elevation of about 1,800 meters. The mountain has 6 ski areas: Timberline, Mount Hood Meadows, Ski Bowl, Cooper Spur, Snow Bunny, and Summit. They total over 19 square kilometers of skiable terrain. Timberline, with one lift having a base at nearly 2,120 meters, offers the only year-round lift-served skiing in North America. There are a few remaining shelters on Mount Hood still in use today. Those include the Cooper Spur, Cairn Basin, and McNeil Point shelters, as well as the Tilly Jane A-frame cabin. The summit was home to a fire lookout in the early 1900s. However, the lookout did not withstand the weather and no longer remains today. Mount Hood is within the Mount Hood National Forest, which comprises 4,318 square kilometers of land, including 4 designated wilderness areas that total 1,271 square kilometers, and more than 1,900 kilometers of hiking trails. The most northwestern pass around the mountain is called Lolo Pass. Native Americans cross the pass while traveling between the Willamette Valley and Celilo Falls. Naming. Indigenous names. The name Wyeast has been associated with Mount Hood for more than a century, but no evidence suggests that it is a genuine name for the mountain in any indigenous language. The name was possibly inspired by an 1890 work of author Frederick Balk, although Balk does not use it himself. In one version of Balk's story, the 2 sons of the great spirit Sahel fell in love with the beautiful maiden Luwit, who could not decide which to choose. The 2 braves, Wyeast and Pato, unnamed in his novel, but appearing in a later adaptation, burned forests and villages in their battle over her. Sahel became enraged and smote the 3 lovers. Seeing what he had done, he erected 3 mountain peaks to mark where each fell. He made beautiful Mount St. Helens for Luwit, proud and erect Mount Hood for Wyeast, and the somber Mount Adams for the mourning Pato. There are other versions of the legend. In another telling, Wyeast, Hood, battles Pato, Adams, for the fair La Walla Clough, St. Helens. Or again Wyeast, the chief of the Multnomah tribe, competed with the chief of the Klickitat tribe. Their great anger led to their transformation into volcanoes. Their battle is said to have destroyed the Bridge of the Gods and thus created the Great Cascades Rapids of the Columbia River. The mountain sits partly inside the reservation of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. 3 languages are spoken among this confederacy: Sahaptin, Upper Chinook/Kikst, Wasco, and Numu, Paiute. Therefore, any attempt to restore the mountain's original indigenous name would require agreement on which language's name to use. Current name. The mountain was given its present name on October 29, 1792, by Lieutenant William Broughton, a member of Captain George Vancouver's exploration expedition. Lieutenant Broughton observed its peak while at Bellevue Point of what is now called Sauvi Island, during his travels up the Columbia River, writing, "A very high, snowy mountain now appeared rising beautifully conspicuous in the midst of an extensive tract of low or moderately elevated land, location of today's Vancouver, Washington, lying south 67 east, and seemed to announce a termination to the river Quad." Lieutenant Broughton named the mountain after Samuel Hood, 1st Viscount Hood, a British admiral at the Battle of the Chesapeake. Lewis and Clark spotted the mountain on October 18, 1805. A few days later, at what would become the Dalles, Clark wrote, "The pinnacle of the round-topped mountain, which we saw a short distance below the banks of the river, is south 43 degrees west of us and about 37 miles, 60 kilometers. It is at this time topped with snow. We called this the Falls Mountain, or Tim Mountain. Tim was the native name for Celilo Falls. Clark later noted that it was also Vancouver's Mount Hood. Since 1950, there have been several earthquake swarms each year at Mount Hood, most notably in July 1980 and June 2002. Seismic activity is monitored by the USGS Cascades Volcano Observatory in Vancouver, Washington, which issues weekly updates and daily updates if significant eruptive activity is occurring at a Cascades volcano. The most recent evidence of volcanic activity at Mount Hood consists of fumaroles near crater rock and hot springs on the flanks of the volcano. Elevation. Mount Hood was first seen by European explorers in 1792 and is believed to have maintained a consistent summit elevation, varying by no more than a few feet due to mild seismic activity. Elevation changes since the 1950s are predominantly due to improved survey methods and model refinements of the shape of the Earth. See vertical reference datum. Despite the physical consistency, the estimated elevation of Mount Hood has varied substantially over the years. Mount Hood glaciers in late July. Early explorers on the Columbia River estimated the elevation to be 3,000 to 3,700 meters. Two people in Thomas Dryer's 1854 expedition calculated the elevation to be 5,596 meters and that the tree line was at about 3,430 meters. 2 months later, a Mr. Belden claimed to have climbed the mountain during a hunting trip and determined it to be 5,900 meters, upon which pores oozed blood, eyes bled, and blood rushed from their ears. And quad. Sometime by 1866, Reverend G.H. Atkinson determined it to be 5,400 meters. A Portland engineer used surveying methods from a Portland baseline and calculated a height of between 5,500 and 5,800 meters. Many maps distributed in the late 19th century cited 5,596 meters, though Mitchell's School Atlas gave 4,300 meters as the correct value. For some time, many references assumed Mount Hood to be the highest point in North America. Modern height surveys also vary, but not by the huge margins seen in the past. A 1993 survey by a scientific party that arrived at the peak's summit with 7.3 kilograms of electronic equipment reported a height of 3,426 meters, claimed to be accurate to within 32 millimeters. Many modern sources likewise list 3,426 meters as the height. However, numerous others place the peak's height 1 foot lower, at 3,426 meters. Finally, a height of 3,429 meters has also been reported. Glaciers. Mount Hood is host to 12 named glaciers or snow fields, the most visited of which is Palmer Glacier, partially within the Timberline Lodge ski area and on the most popular climbing route. The glaciers are almost exclusively above the 1,800 meters level, which also is about the average tree line elevation on Mount Hood. More than 80% of the glacial surface area is above 2,100 meters. The glaciers and permanent snow fields have an area of 1,348 hectares and contain a volume of about 0.348 cubic kilometers. Elliott Glacier is the largest glacier by volume at 0.09 cubic kilometers, and has the thickest depth measured by ice radar at 110 meters. The largest glacier by surface area is the Colad Glacier System at 215 hectares. Glaciers and snowfields cover about 80% of the mountain above the 2,100 meters level. The glaciers declined by an average of 34% from 1907 to 2004. Glaciers on Mount Hood retreated through the first half of the 20th century, advanced or at least slowed their retreat in the 1960s and 1970s, and have since returned to a pattern of retreat. The neo-glacial maximum extents formed in the early 18th century. During the last major glacial event between 29,000 and 10,000 years ago, glaciers reached down to the 790 to 700 meters level, a distance of 15.0 kilometers from the summit. The retreat released considerable outwash, some of which filled and flattened the upper Hood River Valley near Parkdale and formed D-flat. Older glaciation produced moraines near Brightwood and distinctive cuts on the southeast side. They may date to 140,000 years ago. Hiking. As seen in this aerial photograph, Mount Hood is not far from the Portland-Vancouver metro area. The Mount Hood Forest is home to approximately 1,600 kilometers of trails. The Cooper's Spur Trail leads to 2,590 meters in elevation, the highest reachable point one can gain on the mountain without requiring mountaineering gear. The Timberline Trail, which circumnavigates the entire mountain and rises as high as 2,200 meters, was built in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps. Typically, the 65.5 kilometers hike is snow-free from late July until the autumn snows begin. The trail includes over 3,000 meters of elevation gain and loss and can vary in distance year to year depending on river crossings. There are many access points, the shortest being a small walk from the Timberline Lodge. A portion of the Pacific Crest Trail is coincident with the Timberline Trail on the west side of Mount Hood. The predecessor of the Pacific Crest Trail was the Oregon Skyline Trail, established in 1920, which connected Mount Hood to Crater Lake. Climbing. Mount Hood is Oregon's highest point and a prominent landmark visible up to 160 kilometers away. About 10,000 people attempt to climb Mount Hood each year. It has convenient access though presents some technical climbing challenges. There are no trails to the summit, with even the easier south side climbing route a technical climb with crevasses, falling rocks, and often inclement weather. Ropes, ice axes, crampons and other technical mountaineering gear are necessary. Peak climbing season is generally from April to mid-June. Landmarks along the southern climbing route of Mount Hood. There are 6 main routes to approach the mountain with about 30 total variations for summiting. The climbs range in difficulty from Class 2 to Class 5.9+, for acrophobia. The most popular route, dubbed the South Route, begins at Timberline Lodge and proceeds up Palmer Glacier to Crater Rock, the large prominence at the head of the glacier. The route goes east around Crater Rock and crosses the Coleman Glacier on the Hogsback, a ridge spanning from Crater Rock to the approach to the summit. The Hogsback terminates at a bergschrund where the Coleman Glacier separates from the Summit Rock headwall, and then to the Pearly Gates, a gap in the Summit Rock formation, then right onto the Summit Plateau and the summit proper. Technical ice axes, fall protection, and experience are now recommended in order to attempt the left chute variation or Pearly Gates ice chute. The Forest Service is recommending several other route options due to these changes in conditions, for example Old Chute, West Crater Rim, etc. Climbing accidents. Main article, Mount Hood climbing accidents. As of May 2002, more than 130 people had died in climbing-related accidents since records have been kept on Mount Hood, the first in 1896. Incidents in May 1986, December 2006, and December 2009 attracted intense national and international media interest. Though avalanches are a common hazard on other glaciated mountains, most Mount Hood climbing deaths are the result of falls and hypothermia. Around 50 people require rescue per year. 3.4% of search and rescue missions in 2006 were for mountain climbers.